Good morning. It's Lisa with Lisahealyourself. Today we're going to look at shadow work. What is shadow work? Basically, how to do shadow work, why to do shadow work. So, if you're not familiar with shadow work, or the shadow self is the part of ourself that is relegated to the unconscious, to the subconscious, to the parts that we don't see because it's painful or it's distressing or it has hurt us in some way, or we can't fully accept part of ourselves because we've learned over time that this part of ourself leads to something that we don't like, whether it's a rejection or an abandonment or a deep hurt. Carl Jung, who really termed the coin the shadow self, and he looks at the creation of your ego and what's in the construct of your self-identity, and what is in the conscious awareness and what's in your unconscious or your shadow. So the shadow is just literally all those parts of ourselves that we would rather not look at. All those parts of ourselves that we've learned over time to disown or ignore or reject or deny because we had reasons. There's never not a reason. And we usually start to form these patterns in early childhood or as we're growing up, or just, as we meet people, as we interact with people in the world, as we're building our self-identity and creating this persona of who we are, we ultimately get hurt or rejected or abandoned, or somehow we fail to meet our own needs, and this is scary and fearful. And when that happens, we start to say, oh, this part of ourselves gets us hurt, or this part of ourselves gets us abandoned or rejected, or this part of ourselves people don't like, right? And if people don't like it, then they might reject me, or they might not accept me fully, or they might judge me, or they might criticize me, or they might just ignore me, or they might move on to other things, put their attention on other things or other people. I might not get my full needs met, if I bring this part of myself out and show this part of myself to people. So it could be a personality trait, it could be a belief, or it could be an emotion or a feeling. It's something about yourself at a fundamental level that you've noticed over time, or your subconscious has noticed, your ego structure has noticed over time. This isn't the part of ourselves that we want to show to the world or to most people, because it's gonna lead to a judgment or a criticism or a rejection or abandonment, or just us not being fully accepted or liked or belonging somehow, right? Fully loved, fully seen, fully heard. And so we just put this part of ourselves away. Or when something happens to us that's just really painful and we just can't bring ourselves to re-experience that, we put experiences, memories, personality traits, emotions, parts of ourselves, right? We bury these things. And that's what's called the shadow self. So if you're wondering what's in your shadow, it's all the things that you don't want to look at. You might be aware of it. You might be aware that they are sort of pushed into the shadow, but sometimes we take these parts and push them down so far that we're not even consciously aware that they're part of us anymore. Like, for instance, I'm going to give you an example. Somebody who, as a child, throws a tantrum or gets angry, lashes out, and their parents and the people around them really have taught these children, I'm going to ignore you, I'm not going to love you, I'm going to painfully reject you when you bring that side of yourself out. And over time, the child learns, I better push this angry side of me down because it's not getting me the attention or the recognition or the boundaries or the validation, whatever it is that I need the reason why I'm angry in the first place or show this emotion, it's hurting me now. It's leading to me not feeling safe in the world because I might get betrayed by this person that I need and love, and I might get rejected. So we push this aspect of ourselves, this anger, this temper, this rage, into the shadow. When it's in the shadow, it's not gone. It's just not focused on, it's not seen. It's still there. It's still a part of you. It lives in the shadows. And sometimes we don't even know it's there. We might see ourselves as a kind, loving, calm, peaceful person, as a person who never gets angry. We have this trait, but we're afraid to let people see it, and for fear of rejection is like when we get triggered enough, that anger comes out. It's like it's in the shadows, but it can get triggered easily. Right? It can get triggered, it can snap here and there, and we see like little flashes of it all over the place, but then we put it back away. And so we do this with not just anger, but we do this with all kinds of parts of ourselves, our identity, everything that we feel, our emotions, the truest parts of ourselves. We've learned that some of these parts won't be loved, won't be accepted. And so we learn to deny these parts of ourselves, to put them in the shadow. But of course, you are everything. You are the whole. You are the all. You are the all that is, right? You are the I am. You are the creator. Because you are the creator, the I am, the fragment of source energy, the fragment of God, you are whole. You are complete. You are just expressing and being who you are. And the thing is, in order to be whole, in order for anything to be whole or complete, it has to be all of it, all of you. And when there's parts of you that you've denied or rejected or disowned or hate, or it's too painful for you to see, you're putting part of yourself locked away. Okay, so you can never over here be whole. You cannot be whole. You cannot be complete. You cannot be the all that is-ness part of source that God has created you to be, that you are, with this aspect of you locked away, because essentially you are fighting yourself. And this is why when you have dis-ease, when you are in dis-ease, whether it's emotionally or mentally or spiritually or physically, it often can feel like you're fighting yourself. And that's because you are. You are at war with yourself. There's parts of yourself that are begging to be seen and loved and to come home, to come back into wholeness. For you to be able to bear all of you, to be all of you, to see all of you, that is the wholeness that your being wants you to be. And so when one part refuses to see the other part, you're essentially at war with yourself, and you are creating dis-ease in your system. And it can manifest either physically or mentally, emotionally, spiritually. We don't know how this is going to manifest, but a being at war with itself can only go on so long before there's like a rupture, before there's dis-ease, before the being breaks apart in other ways, because parts of you are begging to be seen, to be loved, to be brought home. And we're afraid to see those parts and to love those parts, because they often lead to us being so vulnerable. And it's in this deeply vulnerable state where we've been hurt before. Or imagine like a turtle who's in its shell and who slowly pokes its head out, right? To talk about its real feelings, or to show its real feelings, or to express its disappointments, its hurts, to show who it truly is, to express what it truly is, and it gets rejected or denied or criticized or judged, and that turtle pokes its head back into the shell and stays there and thinks, I was right. I shouldn't be this vulnerable. I shouldn't show these sides of myself. I shouldn't talk about this. I shouldn't talk about these deep hurts or needs, shames or guilts, or I shouldn't express this part of myself. And it's not always a negative part of yourself that is put into the shadow. Sometimes it's positive traits that get put in the shadow, because a negative trait will get us more attention, will get us more love, will get us something. And this positive aspect of ourself sometimes gets pushed into the shadow. Mostly it's negative traits that people just cannot be around. They cannot tolerate. It triggers something in them. And so we learn over time, it's mostly our negative traits that get pushed in, but not always. It can be a positive or a neutral trait that for whatever reason is displeasing to those around you. And that threatens your sense of security and belonging and safety. And so we just choose not to focus on those parts of ourselves, not to talk about them, not to see them, but they're there. They are there. Those parts of yourself are there. They're now exiles. They're sitting in little jail cells, turtles in their shells. They're there. And the only way that we can ever be whole is to integrate these parts of ourselves back into the whole, right? Because there's the law of polarity. We always have an opposite and positive charge, a negative and positive charge, right? Opposites. So when one aspect of ourselves is really denied, another aspect comes out to really take the dominant state. And so this one gets pushed. And it's not that we want to push this dominant state now into the shadows and let this one come out. No, we're looking to find a balance. We don't want the polarity, right? We're one, it's like a black and white, a positive and a negative charge. And one charge is the one that's seen, is the dominant that's seen, and the other one is relegated to this shadow aspect or subconscious aspect of us where we don't really accept in various moments. And if it's not met with complete acceptance, love, grace, whatever, we will immediately withdraw this part of ourselves. But what we're looking to do is find balance where this aspect of ourself and this aspect of ourselves, the polar opposite, can coexist, can come into balance, can come into a balance. Both can be felt, both can be seen. There's a place for all of it in the whole. And this is what it means to integrate. This is what it means to come back into balance. This is why dis-ease means we're out of balance. We're out of ease with ourselves. When we are at ease, when we're in balance, all parts can be seen. All parts can be felt. All parts can be. The totality of all that is can be, because it is. And we feel a more neutral charge to it, right? We're not getting triggered in a negative way. We're more neutral. We're neutral. It's allowed. It's allowed to be there. It's loved. It's safe. And when it feels loved and safe and accepted as part of the whole to be there, then everything can coexist and you can be at ease and you can integrate back into wholeness, back into oneness, because the law of one is really the law that governs everything. Now, we all have some negative emotions, and emotions is where the shadow self and the shadow parts of ourselves can be felt and seen. It's emotions that really gauge how we feel about something. And so emotions aren't bad or good. They're a response to our perception about what's happening to us. Are we safe? Are we loved? Do we belong? Right? And when we feel like our sense of self is threatened in any way, probably as a younger person, we learned to put up boundaries. And often a few of our major emotions, which are sadness, anger, and fear and anger, are huge responses to something that we may have that we feel we're threatened. Our identity is threatened somehow. Our safety is threatened somehow. Our boundaries are threatened somehow. This makes us feel unsafe or unloved or that we don't belong, right? So when we're threatened at a deep level, when we feel like it, we can often lash out in anger. We're putting up those boundaries. We're showing like, this isn't right. We're expressing our displeasure with like, this isn't right. You've crossed a boundary. You can't treat me like this, like you're wrong. So anger is like that reaction to put a healthy boundary in place, to stand up for ourselves, but when we do that enough and our sense of safety is threatened because that person withdraws from us now because they can't tolerate those angry emotions, we sometimes put the anger into the shadow self and we fester about things. We start to build up resentment. We don't express it the same anymore. We let it build within us because we're afraid that it might lead to rejection. And we never got to put up those healthy boundaries. We never got to stand up for ourselves in a proper way because now every time we're triggered or we feel like our boundaries are being crossed or we're not standing up for ourselves properly or somebody wronged us somehow or we had a deep need that wasn't met and we want to express that, oftentimes we won't. We won't because we feel frightened, we feel afraid, we feel like we'll be further rejected or abandoned or denied or disowned. But when we can properly put those boundaries in place and stand up for ourselves and when we can have that wholeness about ourselves without fear of abandonment and rejection, we can call that aspect of ourself home. Because anger is really, it stems from a healthy reaction. You don't get angry at something unless you feel somebody's threatening you or crossing a personal boundary or wronging you or rejecting you or doing something and you haven't been seen properly or heard properly. So it's just this way of asserting your own needs. Fear is often a way of feeling like your safety is threatened. And when we feel our personal safety, physical safety, emotional safety is threatened, oftentimes we freeze or we shut down in the face of fear and we withdraw. We don't want to do anything to provoke something further. When you're in a fear response, you just sort of clench up, you tighten up, you just want to feel safe. And so oftentimes we choose to shut down, right? We choose to shut down and not express ourselves and not work through this. And we're afraid. So we hide and we withdraw. And this is a lot of these responses that we do. But our emotions are showing you, like where you feel threatened, where you don't feel safe, where you're not being your whole true self. And it's really grief where we come back into wholeness. Grief is the welling point of coming back together, I think, because when we let ourselves get past the anger and get past the shutdown and the fear and like that snapping and anger and fighting everything and everyone who's hurting us, or withdrawing and freezing and going into our shell like the turtle, in response to fear. When we can get past those two huge emotions, underneath that is usually the vulnerable real self who wants to express just who they are and what they need, and that they don't feel safe, and that they don't feel loved, and that they're scared, and that they're lonely, and that they're sad, and that they feel shame, and they have these heavy emotions. And when we can break past fear and anger, and when we can get down into the depths of sadness or grief for what's been lost, right? Those parts of ourselves that have been lost, that have never been heard or seen or validated or stood up for or connected with or reassured or loved unconditionally. When we can get down to that raw vulnerability, then we break in grief, then we cry. And those tears aren't tears of anger or you're scared. They're tears because you're really showing the true vulnerable part of who you are. And that when the tears flow, when the grief flows for how you've abandoned yourself and how you've disowned yourself and how you've rejected yourself and how you've relegated these parts of yourself into the shadows, when the real vulnerability can be expressed, when we can get to the real heart of your deep, deep needs and emotions and fears of those needs not being met and of you not being loved, of you being abandoned, of you being rejected. And we can really feel those emotions. We start to call them home, because shadow work is about integrating back together. And the only way we can do that is through feeling, through allowing all of this to be felt and to sit with it in your body, no matter how uncomfortable these sensations are. Because ultimately, no matter how uncomfortable the anger or the rage or the fear or whatever it is that you're experiencing is, underneath it is grief. That desperate, vulnerable part of you that wants to break open and cry. And these tears renew us. These tears don't drain us, but they're almost like a forgiveness of yourself, of your own self, as you allow these parts to be seen and felt, to thank them for being there for you, for deeply being sorry for abandoning them and rejecting them, and for just holding space for them, for allowing them back in as part of you, as part of the whole. And when we do this, these parts come home. The turtle sticks its head out of the shell, right? And little by slowly, these pieces feel seen and heard and loved and accepted and valued and safe, and they come home. And when they come home to themselves, we feel a peace in our soul. We feel peace in our heart. We feel like we are home. Right? So we've integrated these parts of ourselves back together. We've brought them back into wholeness with a sense of love. And so the steps to doing shadow work are, first you have to become aware. Like, I'm caught up in a story, I'm caught up in an emotion, I'm not seeing something, I'm reacting in certain ways, I'm being triggered by certain things. And so the healing happens then and now. That's when we stop. We become aware that you're caught up in the story. You're no longer the observer. You're no longer the totality of your being, and you're caught up in the ego structure, this identity that you've created, this persona of who you are that isn't the whole you or the true you. It's just a piece of you. It's the character in your play that allows you to live this life. But the real whole you is everything, is all of it, is all the pieces, is all the vulnerabilities, is all the parts that we don't self-identity with, but are still there. And when we have these emotions come up, we can feel dysregulated. We feel it physically, we feel it emotionally, we feel it mentally, like we're dysregulated, we're spinning, we have sensations, right? What we need to do is sit with these uncomfortable sensations. We're first aware that we're caught up in a story, and we separate from the story. We become the observer. We become the part of ourself that isn't caught up in the identity that we've created. And once we do that, that's step one. We feel it. We feel the dysregulation. We feel the sensations. We feel the emotions. We feel the hot and cold and surges and discomfort and everything flowing from our body and our mind and our heart and our soul and our emotions, and we allow it. We allow it to be there. And then as we feel it, we open ourselves up to calling it back home, to apologizing to it for keeping it down. And we see it fully. And when we do, often we hit that point of grief and the tears flow, washing away, a calling back home. And these parts feel safe to come home out of exile. And we thank them. We thank them genuinely these parts that we've hated and denied and rejected, because we see that they were protecting us. We see that they were showing us what we needed to learn. We see that if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't even be on this path. And that if we weren't on this path, we wouldn't become the wholeness of what we are. When you're on this spiritual healing path, you're asking your traumas to come out. You're asking these parts of yourself to be seen. You're getting what you ask for. And it's difficult and it's hard. But when we allow it, when we see it, when we feel it, and then when we thank it, we are really, really allowing these parts to integrate back, to come back into wholeness. That, and then and only then do we feel at ease, do we feel at peace, can we come into wholeness, and does our body, heart, mind, and soul become one again? This is when we're not suffering with dis-ease anymore. This is when we heal deep depression and anxiety and physical disease. This is when we heal those past traumas and let go of memories and break patterns that were holding us back and beliefs that no longer serve us. And when we do that, we create a new sense of our ego, a new layer, a broader, a more full, a more whole person. We broaden our definition, this small construct, the small self of who we are when we allow these parts to come home. And we grow ourselves. And every time we do that, we grow. And every time we do that, we grow until we are the all that is, until we are the whole, until we are that fragment of God or source energy, because you are the I am. You are all of it. The whole wants to be whole. And any time it's broken or fragmented, it desires to be whole. And as long as you hate or reject or deny parts of yourself, you can never feel at peace and at ease. You can never be whole, right? You have to love them back together. You have to accept them back in. You have to understand and find a balance and allow. And that's how we come back into wholeness. That is what shadow work is, essentially. And as we see more and more parts of this shadow self, these parts of our self, we grow our consciousness of what our ego is, and we become more and more and more and more whole every time we see more and more of ourself. We become more and more healthy, more and more at peace, more and more at ease. We get more and more of what we want. This is when we start to use the law of manifestation and assumption. It's because the more and more that we are, the more full and the more whole and the more of the totalityness of our being is there, the more that we attract of that, right? So then everything starts to grow on itself. As we become more and more of us, we become aware or conscious of more, and it grows. And this is how we ascend, not only physically and mentally and emotionally, but spiritually. This is how we ascend. So this is what we're doing when we're healing, and this is why shadow work is such a major part of it. We're aware that we're caught up in the story. We see what truly is there, and then we allow it by feeling it. We feel it, we feel it, we feel it, no matter how uncomfortable it is. We don't judge it, we don't criticize it, we accept it, we love it, and we integrate, because we call it home by thanking it and by finding a balance with it, by allowing it to exist back in our being and becoming part of our new identity, becoming part of what's seen in conscious awareness in the light. And so it's no longer in the shadow, and that's how we integrate back into wholeness. So I really hope that you have learned a little bit more about shadow work, what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, because we are growing into who we were truly meant to be in the first place. Rather than shutting it down, we're allowing it all to be seen as a beautiful gift, as part of the whole, as part of all of creation, as the perfection that we are, as a full spectrum, all that is part of creation. We allow all of it to be seen and know that we're still loved. That's the real healing takes place. I mean, that is what it's all about. So I hope this video has been helpful. I know it's been a long one. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. Please help this channel grow by subscribing. If you liked this, if you resonate, subscribe. And I know that healing is not easy, but you can do this. You can heal. Just don't be afraid to feel and see what is there. So thank you for your time, and I will see you in the next video.